if you have not yet already, you should absolutely submit your questions in the Discord. You should probably see a link below right there. So jump in there. We're going to try to get through as many of these as we can live. If you don't get your question answered, do not worry. We are absolutely going to answer all questions after the fact, okay? So while you do that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel of experts here. So first, of course, we have Steve. He's on the left over here for me. I don't know where you see him, but Steve is the CEO and the wizard behind Builder.io. You just saw him in the demo. Steve, you want to wave or something? I don't know. You just unmuted.
I just say hi. You probably saw me in the video. Yeah.
And also we have Jake, who's currently a developer advocate at Figma, but he actually does have quite a technical background. Former software engineer, former design systems expert. So Jake, you go ahead and wave and we'll kick this thing off. Awesome. Oh, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Julia. I head up partnerships for Builder, and that obviously includes our partnership with Figma. So I'm really, really excited. I'm going to be the Q&A lady. So if you see me staring over there, that's where the questions lie. Okay. All right, let's get into this. I'm just going to pull all of these up. All right. Looks like the first question is for Jake. It's a big one. Figma, why would Figma partner with somebody like Builder on something like this instead of actually creating it on your own?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reality of like product development is that lots of people build things in different ways, and there's lots of different needs out there. And as we better understand developers, we know that like everyone's kind of got not only their opinions, but like requirements can be very different, right? And so the best way to meet folks where they're at is to build a platform that allows them to kind of like make the link and make the connection themselves, right? And to allow folks like Builder to come in and be like, hey, like we built an integration here that does something, you know, that caters to a very specific need, right? In just like an awesome sense, and the way that y'all are doing it is fantastic. So I think our take is essentially like, we have a tool that a bunch of developers are already engaged with, right? So like a third of our users are developers, but most of those developers are coming to Figma to consume a design that's been created by someone else, right? And so our approach has been, let's raise the baseline. Let's like make a view, and that's what dev mode has been, which we announced at Config in June. Let's raise that baseline so that developers can kind of like engage with Figma on their terms in using language that they expect. We kind of called it like a developer's room in the designer's home, instead of the developer just kind of like visiting and sleeping on the couch all the time. But yeah, like let's create that space, elevate that baseline, but then allow folks to come in and just like build the very specific integrations to solve very specific problems. So that's kind of that's the approach that we've taken, and we love the sort of thing that y'all are doing.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned dev mode. Are there any other specific like launches or developer specific features you guys have released recently?
You know, at the enterprise level, like, so we've come out with variables, first of all, which is available to everyone. And variables are kind of like, they do what design tokens do, and they also do a lot more in Figma for a lot of design use cases, especially in the prototyping world and other stuff there. But, you know, we have like a REST API for reading and writing variables to sync to your code base, which is often something we see as like lots of folks at like an enterprise level are like needing to do these like major automations around like token systems and stuff, like token libraries and whatnot. So there's like, we have stuff like that. We also are like thinking a lot about kind of like the design to development process and like optimizing from like just a collaboration perspective. Collaboration between designers and developers is like largely unsolved broadly. It's very much solved like people have their own workarounds to make it work for them. And so we're very much like thinking about like, how can we help abstract some of these concepts and like provide a path for folks to really just like make that design handoff. I don't like that term, but like that design handoff step more collaborative, easier, getting some of the stuff that is like really annoying in that space out of the way for people so they can focus on the stuff that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense. Given that a lot of the attendees today are developers, I have a question that's actually bubbled up in some of the partner previews we've done. I'm going to simplify it. I've heard a lot of different variations of this, but basically, do developers need to worry about their job with tools like this? That's for both of you.
I could take a first stab at this one. So this comes up a lot. And I will say, here's the number one thing we've noticed is, and anybody in the chat can correct me if I'm wrong about any of this. We've done some polls, we've asked around. Generally speaking, taking a design and manually writing border, top, red, 1 pix, dashed, and then the next line, and then the next line is not developers' like favorite thing to do, especially when that's already information in another tool. It's like if you had to convert from trying to think like HTML to PDF, and you had to write the PDF from scratch versus a tool that can just generate the PDF. Use the thing that can be generated at any time. When you don't have to do that step and you can take that tedious work off your plate, what you get to do is work on more complex, more interesting things. Add the functionality to the components. Like, sure, we showed examples of the AI adding functionality. AI is not going to connect it to your backend API and blah, 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 blah. Like, that's still and always will be a role for specialized developers. Design the actual component structure. A human is going to have to decide what are the reusable components, what are the props. The AI can suggest things, but if you're used to using OpenAI, Midjourney, Dolly, whatever, it's very much a tool to be used with expert human guidance. It's not something where you're suddenly a developer or suddenly an expert and you can build skills while doing it. But let's say that in the best case scenario, this lets you move 80% faster, worst case 50%. What we tend to find is as soon as people can develop things faster, or we could say the furthest extreme, you have Builder's API integrated and you have a Figma design for a new homepage and you can just publish it to your live site without development being involved. Guess what that means? Developers get to work on a lot more interesting stuff, more challenging. At my last job, our front-end team worked at a company called ShopStyle, actually Julia too, e-commerce. I was leading our front-end development team, and we were always bouncing between marketing these new landing page and like the fun stuff. The fun stuff was like make the search UIs better, add these interesting new A/B tests of like advanced searching and filtering and like browsing features, add these awesome new interactive flows. And every time we got ripped off of that to the new landing page or we need a box here that's promoting Black Friday, it's like, I don't want to do that. And the team didn't want to do that. And we hope this wipes a lot of that off of your plate. And as soon as that happens, and what we found is when companies can move faster, their appetite just goes up. They just want to do more. They want to ship more. And that I don't see it ending anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree. I think I also I come from a background where creativity is a core part of my understanding of code and the value of development. Like early on in my career, I got started like building things on CodePen and like demos and building community around kind of like pushing the web forward and doing unique things for the sake of doing them. And the value there is that grows it broadens the overall conversation about what's possible on the web. I look at like a site, even just like what we were just tuned into watching the announcement, and like the sorts of like the creative thinking that it takes to think of an interface as something that's dynamic in the way that is, right? That's an energy that has a very practical business case for this, right? But it also has a spirit to it that I think is unique to the web, or at least led by the web. And the way in which we innovate sharing information and connecting, there's something there that I think is, when I think about the role of a developer, I think about people that are always thinking about the future and ways to build things and drive adoption of new things. Like a perfect example of this, like we've only scratched the surface with what's possible on the web today. There was a time where like the web was the thing that was keeping us from designing anything cool. And it was pushing back against design ideas that we were used to in print. It's like, oh, we want to do shadows. We want to have like tons of control over typography. We want to, and web developers were just like, no, you can't do any of that. Like, so think of a new design paradigm where it's like super limited and all of that. And now we're in a place where like the web platform in particular like can do way more than we're trying to keep up with what's possible. I think about things like container queries, things like CSS grid, even like is still something that is like, feels like early adoption, even though it's been around for a while. There's new things like color fonts. There's new things like font units where you can start doing like root line height measurements as your margin instead of, and like calculations of that instead of static values, regardless of what font is being rendered. We have all sorts of things like that, right? It's going to take people to find that to be cool, to educate their designers, to start designing newer, better things to push the ball forward, right? And so when I think of this question, I think of there's always going to be a need for that energy, no matter how it manifests, no matter how much like tooling is optimized and all of that. A lot of things that we can only speak so much to today and can only have a vision for. But there's always going to be a desire to like, or a space to push things forward and to get people thinking about new things to train models on, essentially, like new ideas of what interfaces can be. To me, that's always been a core function of web developers. And so I don't see that going anywhere for a while, because like we're only scratching the surface of what's possible on the web.
I like how you phrase that a lot. Like, and it's true, like AI can only be trained on things that are already well understood and have actually become redundant at this point. Things that you can feed literally millions of examples to. And that opens up engineers to be able to do what they want to do, which is new things, to break new ground, figure out what can be done that hasn't been done before. I think is a lot of reason why people get into it, not necessarily to do the same thing a million people have already done. So anyway, just to wrap a bow on that. Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah, your jobs are all safe, friends. Don't worry.
We found.
All right. I'm going to read this one verbatim, and then Stephen may take some defining for the greater group. But it looks like some people are wondering if GPT-4V is just as good as Visual Copilot. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, good question. So GPT-4V is where you can upload images to GPT-4 and use that as part of your prompt. There's been some examples online of people taking a screenshot of a Figma or something else, another website, and saying, hey, turn this into code. And sometimes getting decent results. I will say, if you're curious about it, try both. But what we found so far is most of the time we tried it internally. We got very, very, very bad results. What it seems to do was take the screenshot, describe what was in the screenshot, in text, and then try and generate code matching the text, which, as you'd imagine, you upload this like intricate screenshot of a dashboard designed in Figma or wherever. And then you just get a generic kind of ugly dashboard out of the GPT-4V. So I think the reality here is OpenAI in general is very, very general models, right? And their vision is AGI, general intelligence. I'm not going to argue how close or far we are away from that, but they're really good at arguably simulating that. And their key technology, LLMs, a fine-tuned LLM is a key part of our process here to make the code really high quality and customized. So it's really important. But and kind of one thing touched on the video is nothing will be better than a specialized model. Nothing will be more accurate or can be more accurate than if you feed it the exact Figma specification, not a screenshot of it, but literally the original source file, which has all the different layers in it, even some that are only partially visible. With our AI, we're actually able to see, you can almost say like see around corners, where you can actually look under and around, bring out the images, and we have the exact pixel values of everything. Like there's zero ambiguity. And I would argue that a specialized model on this will definitely be better. Another thing that you'll probably notice is our AI is wildly faster than GPT-4V, something that's becoming a bit of a known constraint with generative AI is the speed at which it can generate. And so we're seeing more and more of this, in different like people building AI products, extensions, et cetera, of large models have a purpose, but they have certain drawbacks. And creating specialized models, or some call it a small model, can actually be much more optimized for specific use cases. How this expands over time, I don't know. I just know our model, I would guess, will likely be the best at this task now and in the future. We're only getting started on it too. In fact, I noticed something the AI was doing today where I'm like, oh, that can be so much better. So I bet you even tomorrow or the day after, our AI will get significantly better. I even thought about not launching until like a month from now because it's so early. V1, I think, will be a huge, massive improvement on both the quality code, et cetera. And you should expect that. GPT will keep getting better at a lot of things, but it will probably be slower. It'll probably be less specialized and less accurate at the specific task.
Cool. Okay, so this is another one for Steve, actually. The question is, will this be available for non-builder sites, meaning the Visual Copilot? And the follow-up question, do we need to integrate Builder to use Visual Copilot?
Good question. Yeah, I saw that coming up on Discord, et cetera. So no, you actually don't need to integrate Builder at all. We imagine this, as you can imagine, why we called it Copilot is we imagine this a lot like GitHub Copilot, where nobody needs to know where that code came from. I can get a pull request completely generated by GitHub Copilot from an engineer, and I have no idea if the engineer wrote that or Copilot wrote that. Same thing here. You can import a design, grab code, paste to your code base, and create a pull request. Nobody in the world knew you used Builder Visual Copilot as part of it. Now, there are a couple features that will require some level of integration. So if you want that sync to code where you just hit a button, it goes to your code base, you need a little plugin in your dev server, which we provide. Coming soon, the ability to actually import using your components from your code base, that will also need that same integration. Basically, we have a little plugin that goes to your dev server that can analyze your code, can read and write from the code base in a secure way, and that will be required. And then, of course, if you want to go from Figma to your live site over an API, you'll need the kind of full integration, which is really, I showed it. It's one more component, just a way to dynamically deliver content within your application, wherever you want. Usually it's like a ... page.tsx in your site. So short answer, no need to integrate Builder at all. Start using it today. Grab code, put in your code base, clean up how you want. Awesome. Send us feedback. Let us know how to make it better. It's early. There's a lot to improve. If you want to adopt Builder more broadly, yeah, you have to integrate, but that's a choice you decide to make or not make.
I highly recommend it, though. Builder's pretty cool on its own.
People like it, yeah.
Okay, next question. Can we build something from scratch with Visual Copilot?
Yeah, so we actually have some cool examples. I think we'll share some videos coming up here soon. But Manu on our team has a really cool demo where he designs like a little app. I think he has, I don't want to spoil it. I think the actual app he's going to show is different. But one he made is like a counter app. He's not a designer, so he made a very ugly little counter app in Figma. And he imported it. And then he used the prompts. He actually used one of our default prompts, make it interactive. And it made a fully rich counter app. Funny enough, you could actually publish that through Builder directly if you want with the API. Or again, copy paste somewhere, deploy it wherever you want. It's pretty cool. Now, do I think this will be a tool for people who are not developers to incrementally build a whole app? Like, do I think this will be something where someone with no development experience will build out a site, layer in the functionality piece by piece? Next thing you know, they've made Facebook via AI and Visual Copilot. No, I don't think so. This is very much purpose-built to be a tool for developers. Or you could also say that overlap between designers, product designers, design teams, and developers. What we're not building this for is to be that use case for anyone to build anything. There are other people trying that. In the wild, I'm seeing pretty mixed results, to be honest. But we want to take what developers are already doing today and spending enormous amounts of time on, make that easier. And like, if it can include fun stuff like incremental interactivity and a few other niceties that makes your life easier, that's the goal.
I really like how they're framing, like that's aligned with kind of how we think about this too, is that idea that people need different things. And sometimes that like little counter thing is incredibly valuable, right? Like just the one-to-one we're published, like there are cases where that's absolutely like the thing to optimize. So yeah, it's really cool how y'all are approaching it. I think it's really aligned with how we think about this too.
That's awesome. Okay, next question. Is it possible to sync back from local code base to the visual editor? I believe that's for Steve as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. Visual editor, I assume they mean Figma probably, right? From your local code base back into Figma, like if you make a change and then bring it back, or did it say visual editor? Maybe
it just says visual editor in there, but listen, give us the Figma answer if that's what comes to you.
I'll answer both. So Builder's visual editor is a real-time preview of your code. And so if you make changes in code, it will be reflected in Builder's visual editor. That's built in. It works really nicely. But yeah, I think the question is probably more like you generate something from Figma, it goes into your code base, you make tweaks, and you want that reflected back in Figma. It's actually something we're exploring. Also, say you make a tweak in Builder and want that back in Figma. We've already built an open source project that can take any HTML and convert it into full-on editable Figma layers. We actually open sourced that years ago. I think the moment that Figma released their plugin system, I think I was one of the first. I spent a weekend making this.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and had it. I think it was in the first batch of plugins that existed, and it did that. So we're thinking we could reuse that technology that we totally open sourced for something like this. I don't know where to fit in the roadmap yet. We're really waiting on feedback to see what do people want out of this product. We have our thoughts on what the next things to tackle are, and certainly the private beta features to get them out into public beta. But we really want your feedback. Everybody, is the workflow, is that the ideal workflow? That'll be more of a focus for us. If there's other things, yeah, we really want to kind of steer it accordingly. I'm curious though, Jake, have you run into this being a use case of, I guess we have a plugin that does it, but yeah, this idea of bring things from other places into Figma, especially from code.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to think about this. We don't have to spend too long on it, but like the plugin API in Figma is the best way to write to a Figma file. And so that requires running inside of Figma. So you would have like an interface that's kind of like engaging with the Figma canvas directly, and it would be used in that context. Our REST API is like read only primarily. So typically that's if you're sending stuff out of Figma somewhere else. But the one other difference would be like variables and token stuff. We have an API at the enterprise level that allows you to kind of like write to Figma variables that still need to be published internally if it's like a published library or whatever. But like that's a different type of optimization than kind of the granular UI update. But yeah.
Steve, before I jump into the next question, you mentioned that you're sort of looking to get feedback around the visual Copilot and just all of this stuff. What's the best way for our viewers to share feedback?
That's a good question. So in the product, there's feedback buttons. If you do an import, there'll be the first one you'll see is a thumbs up or thumbs down. Please use that. Hit thumbs up, thumbs down, and ideally like add a little bit of something too, like why was it bad? That we actually we review all of it, and so we can look at what needs to be improved. That helps a ton. The next thing that really helps too is there's a couple other just like more generic feedback buttons, like when you're grabbing the code and stuff, just hitting one of those and saying this code sucks and here's why, or this code is great and here's why, or request, this is what I want out of it. We review every single thing that's written, including myself. I see every single thing, and the things we see most often asked, we will prioritize. You can also honestly @me on Twitter too, but I'd say in product is best.
Definitely do in product. Don't @him on Twitter. We want other people to see it too, right?
People are going to message me on Twitter anyway. There's no stopping the people who prefer to do that.
I know. You're very popular. Okay. Next question. Are you bound to Tailwind for CSS?
Oh, no, I really should have shown, I showed it briefly in the beginning of the video. I should have shown it in more examples, but no, you're not at all. So Tailwind's very popular these days. And I think well suited for a tool like ours because Tailwind has its own sort of variables for spacing, colors, etc. And we will map to that from your Figma design. So like the whole idea of how you're using tokens and stuff like that will carry through Tailwind really nicely. But we use CSS variables for everything else. You can use plain CSS. We generate nice, clean class names for everything. You can use styled components. You can use, and we give all the components nice names, but you can use emotion. And we'll be adding more. You can additionally use the prompts to customize this. So potentially you want, I gave the example material UI, maybe chakra, maybe ant design system. You can actually use that in the custom prompts, and the output will reflect that in the majority of cases. And worst case, if something is not supported that you want supported, you can send a pull request to the Mitosis project. It's actually not hard to make Mitosis plugins that allow you to use different styling systems. Like one I'd love to add is CSS modules is a really good one that's not currently supported. That's not hard. And so sending the pull request there is nice because you can just verify it works, and then we can bring it into the product and make that an output.
Well, there's actually a follow-up question. Is there a plan to read global CSS to avoid redefining CSS values like fonts, colors, etc. with each component?
Yes. So
that's a problem to solve.
Yeah. So like Jake's reaction, that's a hard one. But the hope is yes. So I would say the biggest thing that we do now today is the styles are too redundant. That's actually the biggest. That and we use width as a value too much. That's actually being cleaned up right now. So the big question we have to solve next, one is we really see this path of connecting to your code base and allow us to read and parse your code base. Our team has a lot of compiler nerds in it. If you've seen Quick or Stencil or Mitosis, we do a lot of work on compilers. So we're very familiar looking at your code base, learning things and figuring out how to map it. So we want to make major improvements there and how we either automatically map those things or allow a manual mapping. Here's my base fonts. Like it's possible with either a compiler and or AI and or just give us a couple pieces of information and we can draw a lot of assumptions. There's a few other ideas we have, but yeah, I'm curious your reactions to this too, Jake. You probably run this.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried. I in a previous role tried creating a VS Code extension that kind of auto completed CSS variables that or custom properties that was aware in this sense, and it's such a difficult problem to kind of like simulate inheritance and the cascade without bringing some convention to the table, for the tooling to read. But yeah, it's just a complex problem. But it's cool that y'all are taking a whack at it because that's a big thing to unlock.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Yeah, I might be more optimistic, honestly, the more I think about this, purely because let's take a simple example. You've got a design. So I think part of what Jake's getting at is in Figma, there's no way to go to like the root of a frame and say, this is all inter fonts. Right. You do it at the specific text level. Now, when we bring things in, because our Mitosis compiler is a part of this process, we can do things both with AI and just normal imperative coding. So we have all kinds of post-processing steps where we can take a look at the tree and go like, every font is inter. So let's basically hoist that to the top. And then because we actually bring this into your, if you do a lightweight builder integration, we will bring it into your website and preview it within your website. We could also then look at and say, oh, and the page is using inter. So just wipe out the fonts everywhere. Mostly how we tackle these things is very piecemeal. Let's just tackle the problems one at a time. So that's a good piece of feedback to share. If people run into these issues, keep sharing them. I guarantee some will be crazy hard and maybe not solvable or need crazy ideas. The fonts maybe less so, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's also we're in a new world now with like AI and stuff like that, and so it could be the sort of thing where models that are really good at consolidating redundant CSS, like is the way to solve this. And I'm really interested to see what you run into and what you come out with.
Yeah, and one thing I was actually thinking about adding to one of the custom prompts by default, and I actually wonder if I would love it if people experiment with this custom instructions or custom prompts. You should be able to tell the AI, the LLM AI at the end to consolidate styles. You may need to get clever with the prompts to get the best possible results. But when using things like just plain CSS as an output in general, I would love it if people find really good prompts as your custom instructions to say like, hey, totally refactor the CSS to wipe out and essentially dedupe and share styling better. That'd be a cool one to see. And I bet you could get good results with the right prompt on that. Something that we can maybe even build in if it works really well too. Share it with us.
I actually have more related questions. What's on the roadmap for this tool? Why is it important to builders so that we can be confident that it will be supported long-term?
Oh, it's a good question. So in terms of what's next, the biggest thing we want to see, we very much believe at Builder of like having strong beliefs weakly held. We don't like to tell our users what to want. We like to understand what they want and deliver solutions to those things. So we have ideas. You've seen some of the things in private beta, and we think we'll want to go deeper on some of those things. I'll say one thing. We just added React Native support in between when I recorded the event video last week and today. React Native is there and supported. So again, we'll have more different libraries, frameworks, etc. But most importantly, we don't want to have a rigid roadmap. We really want to hear your feedback. So I would say share your feedback as much as possible. We'll be sort of consolidating into a more concrete roadmap as we start to hear what's working well, what's not, and we'll prioritize accordingly. I think you had a multi-part question, Julia. What was the other pieces?
Why is it important to builders so that we can be confident that it will be supported long-term?
Oh, yeah, it's a good
builder
question.
proper,
Yeah. No, I can answer this pretty well. What we've observed is, our main product offering to date is what we call a visual CMS or a visual headless CMS. Like the main problem we've solved to date is the problem I ran into at the last company I worked at, like heavily, was just a marketing team that needed constant new pages, page edits. They just needed changes to the website constantly. And an engineering team, which I was leading and all, and I was writing code, who had everything else we'd rather do. And all of that marketing stuff took a lot of time. And I started making internally like this visual tool, this drag and drop editor, so the marketing team could use something more akin to a Wix or Webflow or drag and drop or Figma, where they can just make their changes and get it on the live site. So the engineering worried about the interesting engineering work, and the homepage, whatever, marketing, you own it. And that actually went phenomenally. And that's how everybody to date uses Builder. It'll hook up the API to pieces. Marketing or other teams design can just make updates to the website autonomously. You don't have to worry about it. You can set roles, permissions, workflows, constraints. You can lock it down as much as you want. Stick to your design system of components, whatever. Now, the thing we noticed, though, is a lot of people would love to adopt Builder. We hear this all the time, but it doesn't mean their team is ready to adopt Builder. It doesn't mean their team is ready to make it doesn't need to be a re-platform. You can slot it in next to whatever else you have, but still sometimes people think of it that way. Like, oh, it's a CMS. We have a CMS. Are we ready to use another CMS right now? Or an individual engineer is like, hey, I want to use this, but I don't really have the time or energy to convince my manager, my peers, another department I don't even talk to use a new tool or platform. And so what we wanted to do is Builder's got a lot in it. And all of this like code generation, big parts of it have already existed. Like a whole tenet of Builder is anything you make visually should be able to be turned into code, because you might start visual and end in code at any point in the process. This nice marketing page made a nice hero. Let's use that on other pages, bring it into code, awesome, publish, etc. But if you're just like, you see a blog post we wrote and you say, I want to try Builder and try something, there was nothing for you to try before. And now we realize that one of the biggest feature requests we've had forever is to have a really seamless Figma import, because we observe our users, and many, many users are just Figma to Builder. And in many cases, you do it by hand. So you're dragging and dropping. And while it's not coding display flex, you're still like tediously recreating. It's not fun, in my opinion, when you could just have an automated process. And so we're like, hey, let's make an amazing Figma import. It's going to make our customers so happy. And we're excited about that in general. Let's beef up our code export. It's a key feature. Let's make it better. And if we do that, anybody trying Builder can get value out of Builder, can use it for really useful things without having to convince their team. If they convince the team later, awesome. You probably benefit from that immensely, but you don't have to. And so that's why we're investing in it. This feature set's core to our platform. And it's really where we see the future going. As in, a lot of people ask us, can our visual editor have this, that feature Figma has? And it's like, you know what? Use Figma. We don't have to have every feature of every design tool or visual editor. They have fantastic solutions for these things people are asking for. Let's make a better, more seamless tooling so that you can work in the world you love, and then Builder can serve its purpose best too.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, the next question is about Figma. So Jake, for you mentioned dev mode earlier.
Yeah.
Can you dive a little bit deeper into what dev mode is, and also how it relates to Visual Copilot? There's a few questions about that.
Yeah. So big picture, we have Figma design, and that's where designers are creating products and designing products and building out component libraries. And, that's where all that design work is happening. And we've built a really strong tool for that. But that's a tool with a designer bent, because it's a designer's toolbox. And so while developers have been coming into that space, a lot of developers aren't comfortable being in that space. They don't want to accidentally nudge something 10 pixels to the right? Like they don't know how to navigate complicated layer structures and get through groups and all the keyboard shortcuts you can do to kind of like select the right thing when you're looking at it, And so navigating a design tool is not easy for developers. And so dev mode is kind of our first step towards cleaning that up. And like I said earlier, like one way to think about it is like a room in the designer's home. But also another way to look at it is like just a different set of glasses. And it's like developer glasses for a design file. So navigating a design file is just a lot easier. You know, we built a ton of heuristics around, you know, like how to surface the information that developers are looking for and kind of hide everything else. You can also, you know, mark things as ready for development in design mode. And so those things get highlighted for developers in dev mode. But then we also, like I was saying earlier, we improved our baseline. So our native code gen, like the stuff that we were doing, the CSS, iOS, Android code that we were generating, we improved. An example of that is like we did things like this, kind of speaking to what you were saying earlier, Steve, like we have like a inferred auto layout. So you could have like an absolutely positioned design, and we just kind of infer auto layout using some heuristics so that we could generate Flexbox code for that. But again, we recognize that like that's not the same thing as like exactly what you're going to write every time, right? And not every developer is like, oh, that's exactly what I needed. And so because you get into these problems of like the design file structure and the way things are nested is not how it would be nested in code, you know, and it's not how the layout would be created in code. And so to account for that, you know, that's where extensibility comes in. So we have a new type of plugin called the Code Gen plugin that runs in dev mode that allows any plugin to open up an iframe, which is our traditional UI. But then also, if it wants to, it can use our Code Gen API to surface code snippets directly in the side panel. So, but that, in addition to just being a better experience, we have, you know, features like that, and folks are using like private plugins internally to like get really specific with like the code that they're generating or the things that they service there. We're bringing task management, you know, integrations in, whether it's Jira, Asana, Linear, that sort of stuff, into that space, and kind of like prioritizing things that developers would be thinking about when they're looking at something. And again, it's like that view only experience, because for a lot of developers, that's a place of safety, right? It's like, I can click and not accidentally drag. And what I'm clicking is what I think I'm clicking, you know, which is a problem that everyone has opening a Figma file sometimes. So that's generally like what dev mode is. And we're constantly iterating on it. We have a VS Code extension now that brings dev mode into VS Code. Like you can literally just like open up Figma in VS Code next to what you're doing. And we're working on, you know, so we're doing autocomplete, that sort of a thing. We're also we're improving it right now to bring code like gen plugins into there and other plugins into, like, we're evolving as we speak too on that end as well. And so just meeting people where they're at in as many ways as we can is essentially what dev mode is trying to do. So and maybe Steve can speak to Builder coming to dev mode in addition to design mode and Visual Copilot and all that.
100%. First thing I really want to comment on too, Figma's plugin API is phenomenal. It's probably,
it really is.
Yeah, it's the best I've ever used. It's the best development experience. It's extremely powerful. It does all the things that you want. It's like I've plugged into a lot of stuff, and I haven't been as happy as with Figma's. In fact, it almost set our expectations so wildly high that if we hit the tiny solution, we're like, Jake, we can't do this tiny thing. But really, it's incredible across the board. And yeah, I should have pointed out in our video, every single thing that you saw in the features in the Visual Copilot event video, the announcement, whatever you want to call it, and everything we're releasing all work in dev mode as well. And in fact, there's parts of the dev mode experience I prefer. I really like how the plugins run in the sidebar in dev mode. It's really, really seamless and nice, not a separate window. And so, yeah, if you're a developer using dev mode automatically, as Jake pointed out, it can give you snippets of code. Or if you just want to bounce to a full code export with Builder, it's right there integrated in the sidebar and awesome. And it works extremely well.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Okay, a little bit of a pivot. Question is, why is the AI needed? Can't this be done without AI and just algorithms?
Good question. We've tried that. A lot of people have tried that. So let me take a couple of examples. So the biggest challenge with taking, there's layers of challenges. So you're given a Figma design. Let's start with the first challenge is the set of decisions a developer has to make to bring it into a code base is, you could almost think of it as the hierarchy of information. So the design's just got stuff everywhere. Well, all this stuff needs to be one image, right? And then the stuff next to it needs to be a flex row. And in that is flex columns. and above it, oh, that's a nav bar, so that needs to be like a flex row with wrapping, and then use justify content in between. There's lots of little tiny decisions to be made here, and they're not. I almost want to say not really deterministic. We actually tried to do this about a couple years ago. Can we just manually write code to be like, oh, this is how this would convert to that? And there really was no way. I think the reality is how our eyes work and how we perceive things is, the cool thing about neural networks is they're kind of modeled after how our brains work and how our brains draw associations, neurons that fire together, wire together. That's, machine learning in its most recent fashions, neural networks, it's modeled after that. And there's something interesting about, there's a threshold of problems you can solve with pure, almost want to call it like traditional coding. And there's some things that have been just unsolved forever. I would say that like design to code is a bit like the flying car. People thought we'd have it by now. Like computers can do crazy things. Why am I writing the code that is in the tool that you think would not be hard? Well, it turns out it is hard. It's very hard to do programmatically. AI, because it works a lot like how our brains work, it can notice those associations. So two key things it can do on one half is find what should be an image, like hot dog, not hot dog, or like how AI self-driving cars can identify this is a person, this is a cat, etc. AI can identify this is a nav bar, this is an image, this is a blah, 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 blah. Within each of those things, this would be a flex row, this would be a flex column, and it's got tons of training data. Using that workflow of training on examples and letting it do the inference itself, as opposed to writing hard-coded rules where you're probably just making stuff up. If width is greater than this, and if that box is close enough, it doesn't work. The second half of this, though, is generating code that's of high quality. So even a compiler like Mitosis, if all you feed it is, here's where all the things are, and here's what they're styled at, it's not going to know what tags to use to be semantic. It's going to be div soup. We don't want div soup. It's not going to know what to name things if you're using styled components or, semantic class names. It's no idea. This is div 1, this is div 2, this is div 3. It's code. What AI can do as the post-processing step is say like, oh, this, looking at the actual text contents and the structure of the DOM, this should be a section, H2, image, etc. This should be a button. This should be called like the hero wrapper, hero inset, whatever. Those are all the things that, and I think why AI is having such a revolution right now is in part because there have just been these long outstanding challenges that people thought we should be able to solve, kind of like this question's pointing out, and we just can't because there's a missing piece. It reminds me of like when blockchain came out. In a way, it's very different in certain ways. I wasn't huge on blockchain and crypto personally, but I know many people were, and they had good reasons and a lot of times. But what that was, this whole idea of a completely public database that's also secure, was fascinating. It was a new thing we could build on top of. Now, it had other challenges. Scaling was a major issue, and this idea of building apps on top of it became a maybe not right now thing, like people maybe thought would advance faster. Similar to AI, we have this new thing that can become a glue that really this problem always has been maybe 90% solved. You can use Figma's built-in features, which to my understanding don't currently use AI, and it can give you pieces of code anywhere. But to stitch it all together at the end, we've definitely found AI is the big unlock for that.
I'm surprised you didn't mention it, but we do actually have the most popular Figma to code plugin with like over 500 installs, right? And but this is way better, I would say. Yeah, there are 500,000. That's right. We previously
solved this without AI. Like one question I did see come in is like, how is this different from other Figma to code things? All the others do what we used to do, which is, so we do have a popular plugin for this, and I was never happy with it. And if anybody follows me on any social media, I never talked about it because I was not happy with it. Now, it will save you time, but it required you to use specific grouping and auto layout and pre-rasterization. You had to basically develop a design file and then import it. And that's cool. It did save you 20% of your time, maybe, if you learned a whole new set of workflows. But I was really never happy with that. It was only like when you can make it a one-click that I think it's a really, really good experience for people. And that's what kind of sets this apart. So we hope to stay the most popular and get to 1 million or something. And we think this will help a lot.
Also to be clear, this isn't an open AI wrapper, right? I think in the presentation you talked about how this is like 3 distinct technologies chained together. You want to quickly cover that again?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I should make a follow-up video going really deep on this. But yeah, I mean, a lot of companies adding AI, I would say I would guess 95% of AI announcements are like, we hit OpenAI's API, we got a response back, and we use that in our product. And that is great. And that can solve cool stuff. It's not defensible. Other people can do that too quite easily. And I think people pretty well understand what things like ChatGPT are good at and not great at. And even fine tuning will only get you so far. It's not going to make ChatGPT or LLMs have all new capabilities. Because remember, fine tuning is not training. And I've even seen people say they're training models when they're actually fine tuning. And that distinction actually is important. And people are not always open about that, or maybe it's unintentional, that the difference is not clear in their minds. But it's a very different thing. And for what it's worth, that was one of our first approaches. We've been trying to tackle this problem for, probably mentioned, like a couple of years. Ever since we launched our Figma plugin, it got popular and we were not happy with how it worked. We were grinding at, well, how do we solve this? We tried many different types of AI approaches. One was LLMs and fine-tuning LLMs as just the sole component. We actually tried training models. We tried reusing models of different varieties. There's so many ways to approach adding AI. AI itself is not a feature. It has to solve a problem. It has to have a reason why this kind of statistical approach will solve this issue. And so, yeah, ultimately we found the workflow worked well for us is completely train a brand new model from scratch. So we're in the business of at a smaller scale in a lot of ways than like OpenAI and Midjourney and stuff, but we are training our own model. It was totally built and trained from scratch from us. It's not layering onto anybody else's data or anything. That also comes with a couple other benefits like privacy. Like if people use our Figma import, their data, that data actually does not become part of the model in a way that people fear with LLMs where, let's say you are a company with very private information and you import it. Some people fear with LLMs that if the LLM has awareness of the data, you could ask ChatGPT in the future, what is builder's secret something? And if it saw that information, it might be like, oh, I know the answer to that. And that concerns people. Now, I have to imagine these companies are actually much more secure with data than maybe some imagine. But the beauty of controlling and building on models, we can make that 100% safe, secure, and private by default. And we can guarantee it. We know everything about how the thing works inside and out. And then it's completely specialized and it's as small as possible, meaning it's fast. We didn't want this to be slow. Even past iterations of our plugin were slower. And this, I didn't mention in the announcement, but actually this more advanced plugin is actually like 10 times faster, which is crazy. It was kind of a cool set of problems we were able to solve to do that. Next step is mitosis. So because it's a compiler, that gives us far more deterministic output. So when the AI produces essentially an abstract tree of here's all the pieces, here's what's grouped, here's how they need to be positioned, we can turn that to code of a whole lot of varieties. And we can do it in a way we have very high confidence. That fast output that comes straight out of the compiler is highly deterministic. It'll always be the same from the same design that came in, or really from the AI output of our conversion. Adding new languages doesn't mean training an LLM or feeding to an LLM. Like, let's say you invent a new language tomorrow. Great, no LLM knows about that. But if you integrate that with mitosis, boom, solved, done. And what LLMs are really good at is when you give them examples, extrapolating or interpolating off of that. So we generate code with a quick framework. If you go ask ChatGPT, give me a quick component, it's going to be like, here's React, and good luck. Because mitosis has fully integrated with Quick and you can add additional like Panda CSS or whatever, awesome. It'll give that baseline code. The LLM can clean it up. And that's where the last step is the LLM. The LLM is very good with some fine tuning at semantic structure, semantic naming, making the code high quality, higher quality than just a compiler and just a like design to like a hierarchical code structure AI can provide. I'll make a video on this with more visuals sometimes. If that made little sense, I'll go into more detail separately.
Yeah, you should absolutely follow Steve on InBuilder and Figma on Twitter and LinkedIn and everything to make sure you're staying up to date with all the updates. I know we're at the hour, but we're probably going to do about 10 more minutes of questions before we wrap, so keep them coming. We do have a follow-up that is related. Will the generated code be up to date with the latest versions of a framework? For example, with Angular, could it do standalone components and using signals?
Yes. So that I'm so glad that's asked. That's exactly the reason why us having a compiler, which we also built from scratch, instead of an LLM, is LLMs are not aware of Angular's latest updates and signals. Adding it to the compiler is just a pull request, and those are not that complicated. Yeah. And so contributing to mitosis, you can have that the day after it's released. If you can contribute, it's done. And mitosis, for what it's worth, has other uses than just Visual Copilot. We use it to generate a builder provides different UI components you can actually use in code, and we write it with mitosis in a JSX format, and we'll compile it out to 10 different frameworks, and now you've got packages for 10 frameworks. So contributing to mitosis serves a whole lot of different needs, especially as the front end landscape gets more fragmented, not just with new frameworks, but also variations of frameworks. Standalone components with Signals and Angular is pretty different than what's come before it. And so, yeah, definitely can be supported immediately with that. That's
the right approach. I mean, like, we're already in a fairly fragmented state, especially when you think about just like approaches to style, how you bring style into, like, so to me, that's like, as we're growing rapidly, that and everything's being pushed forward so quickly, it's like we don't have time to train a new model on the new thing. But taking that kind of like, let's just update the compiler approach, like, I don't know. It feels like y'all are really positioning yourself in the right space to grow quickly with everybody else and to capitalize on the cool stuff that everyone's doing.
That's what we hope. I think like our big realization was compilers have certain strengths and weaknesses, LLMs have certain strengths and weaknesses, custom built models have certain strengths and weaknesses. The thing we're probably most proud of is making a tool chain using each of those things, capitalizing all the strengths. I want the latest, greatest, awesome. Mitosis solves. I want semantic renaming, awesome. LLM solves. I want perfect accuracy and fastest possible speed, Figma into Builder to get all this solved. And it's worked better than anticipated. There's still lots to improve. Don't get me wrong. There's things I see in the code output where I'm like, it's going to get fixed. But we're really happy with the foundation. Foundation feels rock solid, and this is going to get so much better over the coming months.
We're very excited about it, obviously. If you can't tell. Okay, we have a pricing question. Pricing for the Visual Copilot, what is that going to look like?
Yes, we don't know yet. We will announce it soon. I will say a couple things. We always want there to be a free tier, a free offering that is generous. We want people to just use the thing for free, get value, and not feel like they're missing out on a lot. Certain things do have hard costs. Running anything through an LLM is extremely expensive because those models are massive, and the compute power to run your own or use a provider is super expensive. And so we have to figure out a good balance to cover the cost of that so we don't lose money, so we don't have to ask people not to use the thing. So that part we will figure out, but I don't think the pricing will be scary. We hope we announce it in the coming weeks or months, and we're always looking for feedback too. But again, definitely always plan to have a capable free tier that I think people will be happy with.
Okay, next question, unrelated. Will designers have to design in a specific way to make this work? Or does the AI take the heavy load on this one? And another similar question, as a designer, do I need to take any changes to how I design and Figma into consideration? So essentially the same thing. Do designers need to do anything different?
Great question. I'm so glad it was asked so I can make it clear. No, the goal of this whole project is you should not have to do anything. You should take any design, and believe me, we've seen some crazy messed up designs, like stuff that like I didn't think was possible. We actually had to reverse engineer to Figma to understand how you even create a design with such strange qualities to it. And that's been a whole experiment, or a trial and error process of our own. So you should not. The goal here, and I would say we probably can do this well in at least 50% of cases, is anything designed by anybody anytime, click import. And if it's not working, that's a bug for us to fix in the model, in the compilation, whatever it is. That said, if you are having trouble with something, adding groups helps a lot. We do look at the entirety of your design file. We don't strip it down to minimal information. We look at everything. So if you add groups, even if you want to go deeper and add auto layout, you can get fine-tuned control. So if you're thinking like, what if I did go in and make a really intricate auto layout setup for all my responsive details, we will factor that in, and those refinements will influence the final results. So shouldn't need to worry about it. If you're not getting results you want, try adding a little bit of grouping and organization to your design file. And I don't mean naming or anything like that, just grouping things that are like one of the biggest challenges the AI that's difficult with the AI right now is, let's say you have a hero and you have ultimately what will be a background image with all kinds of stuff in it. And then you have like text and a button. On the design file, if those things aren't grouped in any way, where maybe the foreground is a group and the background is a group of some kind, it just looks like tons of stuff on the screen. Yeah. The AI is not always able to know what's foreground and what's background. It tries, but the types of things I've seen can be all over the place. So grouping those two things can make it a lot better. We'll probably put out a blog post at some point of like tips and tricks, kind of like ChatGPT has, ways to get best results. But for now, the goal is simplicity. And sorry, Jake, I think you maybe want to add something.
I spot on. Big fan of the approach. The way I like to think about this problem is kind of like with conventions and configuration, like in Figma, in order to get a certain outcome, you're kind of always walking a line, but the last thing you want is kind of what I refer to as kind of like the Flintstones car, where it's like, oh, we have a car, but you're literally doing all of the power and legwork yourself, right? Like to get to that state. And it's like, what we're really trying to do is have an engine, like, and a car that can drive without me needing to drag all this extra weight that I wouldn't have to carry if I just ran, And so I think that's really the right approach. And, it's exciting to think about what the future is going to be there,
Agreed.
I think we're going to wrap here, and there are so many more questions. And honestly, I think you should keep submitting them. Our team's going to go through everything. In terms of next steps, you should be receiving an email today about how to sign up for the Visual Copilot, which you have to do. You have to give us feedback. Should definitely follow us. Well, like I said, follow Builder, follow Figma, follow Steve, follow Jake on Twitter to see all cool updates coming up. Definitely subscribe on YouTube for more follow-up content. That's it. Steve, Jake, you want to share anything else before we wrap?
This is
I'd
great.
just say, Figma.com/developers. We also we'll probably provide a link with some developer resources if you're interested in building plugins or just how Figma thinks about developers using Figma. We got a lot of resources out there. We got some good YouTube content as well from Config last year or this past summer. And really would love to hear from y'all about any feedback you have about Figma as developers.
Yeah, and on my side, I think we covered everything I wanted to say and more. So thank you everybody for tuning in. This is really fun. Like Julie said, you can follow me. I'm also on TikTok, like whatever. You can throw questions my way, comments, replies.
Are you dancing? Are you dancing on TikTok?
He's being modest. His TikTok is great.
I love TikTok.
It is very popular. So
TikTok is my favorite social media platform, without a doubt. But I generally post the same things on other places. So if you follow me on any of them, and we'll be posting other like cool stuff you can do with Copilot, examples, tutorials, get the most out of it type stuff, things you can follow along, open source repos, all that stuff. So yeah, follow anywhere. I'll usually have the same stuff everywhere. People are nicest on TikTok though. Twitter people are mean sometimes. Reddit people are really mean. TikTok people are so nice.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Again, please go ahead and try the Visual Copilot feature. We're so excited about it, and we can't wait to see what you think. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
See ya.